And that principle sort of gave me permission to explore things in a different way. Not right or wrong, but is it effective for me? And that was a big one.
Welcome to the Juggling the Chaos of Recovery podcast, where we focus on health and wellness and overcoming all types of addictions. You're in the right place if you're a mom, dad, sibling, or caregiver who has a loved one who is or was struggling with an eating disorder or any other kind of addiction. In a time where everything seems heavy, I'm here to bring you a very real, yet lighthearted take on what the heck we're all supposed to do with our lives while we care for our loved ones who are struggling. One thing holds true throughout it all. You can't juggle the chaos without smiling. At least a little bit. Welcome to another episode of the podcast, everyone. I'm so glad you're back here to listen and really appreciate you continuing to share. And as I've shared on a couple other podcasts, there's a really interesting new platform for us podcasters, kind of like a Tinder for podcasters, where we can find others who are, that we'd like to be a guest on their show, or we'd like them to be a guest on our show. And so today, Kristen Elliott is joining me. We found each other on matchmaker.fm. And I was immediately wanted to chat with her because she has a podcast about eating disorders and wonderfully named Starving Ed, which is interesting. We'll talk about that later. But again, on a mission similar to mine, in that we want to get the word out about the struggles of eating disorders and really share that story of hope, that there is hope for recovery, hope for a better life, hope for a better tomorrow. So, Kristen Elliott, thank you for joining me today on my podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm always excited to have these conversations with other people. I think they're really important conversations to have because there is so much stigma, I think, still around eating disorders. And the more we can talk about them, obviously, the better.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And as we talked a little bit before we jumped on here, just the idea that I think some people think of eating disorders that, oh, wow, there's these people that have eating disorders and they've, bad, sick, not bad, but, they're bad disorders, or they're in a real struggle and they're in a treatment center. And there is this space of disordered eating, if you will, right? And where people aren't necessarily sick so that they have to be in a treatment, but there's still some disorder there. And as we often share, it's not about the food. It's really about the behaviors and the emotion behind that. And we'll get into that as well as time goes on here. But let's start with the story, as we always do here. Let's start with your story. You do have a story yourself of an eating disorder, and which has brought you to, again, trying to help, working to help other people. So I'd love for you to start with that as we, begin this conversation together.
Sure, I'm happy to. So I'll start by saying I am 45 now, and my eating disorder started when I was 18 years old, and I finally went into treatment at 38. So I've only been in, not only, but I've been in recovery for about 7 years now, and had the eating disorder for 20. So it spans quite a long time, my journey. And if I think about life before the eating disorder, I would say that I grew up in a very diet-focused culture, and I certainly think that played into things I've learned about food, about eating, about health. But I do think that my eating disorder was also very much about a personal identity issue of low self-esteem, didn't know who I was, didn't know where I fit into life. And so those younger years growing up, I'm in this diet culture and everything, and always wanting to lose weight and be special in some way. And when I was 18 at the end of high school is when I went on yet another diet, but I don't remember it being particularly difficult, but I do know that I did not eat a great deal at all. And within a very short period of time, I'd lost a significant amount of weight. And it was like bam, it started from there, because once I'd lost that weight and the recognition I got from it and the feeling of having something that other people wanted, I guess, it was just intoxicating. Like, how could I let that go? And maybe it was that I'd spent so much of my childhood sort of feeling not seen, that now that I was being seen, I was not going to let that go. And it hung on for dear life. And I guess it started in restrictive anorexia, over the years developed into bulimia, binge purge type. But at the onset of the eating disorder, I thought, you know, I'm doing something not good here. It's not good for me. I don't like it, but I'll be able to stop. And so 20 years goes by and I'm looking for some way to eat better. I have it in my head that it's this problem with the way I eat. I don't know how to eat properly. And so I'm looking for some diet to fix this problem, which it's a little paradoxical, but
Mm-hmm.
never did find it. And I keep thinking, not another day. I can't do this another day. And years pass and years pass and years pass. And it's like, oh my God, like I'm becoming a statistic, if you will. And that was a big fear of mine, that I did not want to be a statistic. And I guess in some ways this is sort of a carried out theme, is that I didn't want to be forgotten like that, or remembered like that, if you will. And kept trying, kept trying, kept trying. And over the years, I would go and see therapists and naturopaths and try and fix something. I don't know what I was trying to fix. And I still wasn't able to get back on track. And it was around when I was 37 that, you know, it was like everything came together mentally, physically, emotionally, psychologically. I was just falling apart. And, that was sort of the crossroads. I have an option here. I can keep going, or I can find somebody else who can help me, because I obviously, after 20 years, do not know how to get myself out of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many, I listened to your story and it just, some similarities to, my story as I was growing up, and I think, again, things that led to me, to my low self-esteem, and to, I've always wanted to be, I didn't realize this till, as I got older and looked back on that and did some healing, if you will. But just, I felt I was different than my siblings. Mm-hmm. And I am, but I looked at it as really as a negative thing. And that, but I was trying to get attention from me, like, well, pay attention to me. And it's okay if I'm not like this. It's okay if I'm not analytical and that I don't really care for numbers and things like that, which all my siblings are. And it's okay for what I'm doing. And was always, again, as no one can see this because this is just, you're just listening, but I'm raising my hands, like pay attention to me, like, hey, I'm over here and I'm okay. And I think, I just know for myself, that's what I struggled with, not knowing, now that I'm looking back, I saw that that's really what I did struggle with in that space of my junior high school years before I went away to college. And then I was kind of like on my own in college and like wondering how I was supposed to make these decisions and not really feeling close to my mother that I could call and, all of that. So I think, again, I think that some listeners are probably thinking, oh yeah, that sounds like me too. Some similar type of things. And again, just that denial part of it, that like, it's not that bad, right? I'll be able to, and looking, it gets me frustrated many times, is like looking for that next best thing, like, oh, the next best diet, or maybe it's the intermittent fasting now, or maybe it's the keto, or maybe it's the, I don't know, grapefruit, or maybe it's the whatever, right? That's going to lead to all of the answers to all of our problems, right?
All of our problems. Absolutely. And I don't know why I had it in my head that another diet would be the solution. And yeah, the farther I get away from it, the clearer things become now. And I can see just how invisible I felt in the world and not seen. And then to have recognition, like I wouldn't have told you at the time that that's what I was seeking or that's what I was after, but I certainly can look back and say, oh, I just needed somebody to see me. I needed to feel felt by somebody, and I don't think I did.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what I've learned certainly through my journey here of interviewing different people with eating disorders as well as other addictions, I mean, it's a similar type of experience that we're having, and we choose, maybe we choose the food to eat or not eat, or we choose the alcohol or the drugs or the video games or the sex or whatever it is. We choose something to somewhat numb ourselves out, of the dissatisfaction that we're experiencing in the world. And, or I've also seen it that so that you can get attention. Even I would think of, I don't remember if you have children or not, but, with my children, I remember that as a young parent, the kids would misbehave and, you're like, yeah, and then they're getting all the attention from mom or dad or the teacher. And you learned that even if it was bad attention, they were getting attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's interesting because when I was, if I think about that, I don't think I did anything to seek attention in that way. I just knew that it just sort of felt invisible. And it might have been because my parents did not have a happy marriage. So for most of my childhood, it was sort of volatile and I never knew where things stood. And so they were dealing with their own issues. But yeah, I do think there's a big identity piece with much of what we go through. And when we can sort of hit those moments of being able to feel those raw feelings of what we want to feel, but are never taught to feel, then that's where some pretty great transformation happens.
Yeah. And I think, that's, I think, the wisdom of perhaps sometimes getting older. And again, like you said, being far enough away from it to be able to look back and being brave enough to be vulnerable, peel back the layers, open ourselves up. That's a scary place to be in, right? To just be that exposed and that vulnerable. But that's really where the true healing can happen, if we can really look at that and look at things in a little bit different perspective.
Absolutely. It's important we didn't do a lot of talking about anything growing up, and even in my young adult years, did very little communication or talking about feelings. I didn't know how to do that at all. And yeah, certainly something I had to learn later in life, but in learning to do that, it's, I guess, what drove me into doing the podcast and stuff, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but how important those conversations are, because I don't think they're had enough.
I again completely agree, and that I just I just honored my mother yesterday. She died, and we honored her and celebrated her, and again, so much reflection on my part as I was looking to speak at her service, and again, just look back on our years together. And I often would say that we didn't really talk about the bad stuff. She was English, the English, very proper, you just go on with life. And I'm sure it's not just the English, but certainly that was my experience. And so it is, unless you find, I remember either going through in my early 20s as I got out of college and I started to feel better about myself and, grow into a young adult and my career and all that. I was in medical sales. I was in nursing and then in medical sales. And there was a gal that I worked with at one of the hospitals, but she kind of became like a friend. She was significantly older than me, but I would find my way to her office kind of at the end of the day, and we would just sit and we'd close the office and we'd talk. And she was just like it was all, I don't know if I would necessarily call her a pseudo mom or anything, but she was just somebody that I could talk to, and that she was just open and really honest. And we just laughed and talked. And it was just, again, I would find myself back to her office, if I was in the area, and I'm like, I'm going to go to Dorothy's office, and we'd sit and talk. And it was such valuable time for me at that time in my 20s, where I was still kind of figuring out what I was doing in life, although I may be still doing that too. But, it was just a good mentor, if you will, for me. And I didn't have that. I didn't have that with my own mother or my father. And even with my siblings, we just didn't, we're closer now that we've gone through this couple of months of taking care of our mother and helping my dad make decisions. Like, we're really a lot closer now and talk about some things. And it's been really great. But boy, in our 20s, forget it.
No.
Right?
Yeah, I know. It certainly evolves over time. You either change or don't. And I wouldn't say my family are big communicators right now, at least not amongst ourselves. But I think all of us in our own way have become better communicators in general of what's going on inside us. And yeah, that's important to have those people to sit and, I think that was something I missed in my childhood and growing up over the years, is not having that someone to sit down with and just like share.
Well, and it was safe, right?
Yes.
It was a safe, at least with me, myself, and Dorothy. And bless her heart, I mean, she must have shared that with her family, because I lost track of her. I mean, occasionally we get, Christmas cards from each other, but I moved on from medical sales, stayed home, family. But then, I don't know, several years later, again, I'm saying that in quotes, I don't even, because I lost track of her, but I got a card from her, like one of her daughters, and it had a picture of her in there, and it said, "I just want to let you know that Dorothy passed." And, I still have the card over there because it just meant so much. I was like, oh, she remembered us, and that was a special bond that we had, and that she must have shared with her, with her family too. So those are special relationships, and, can really help us in our life. I mean, you talked about identity, and again, I've heard from many other people that there is that kind of lost identity. Say, for instance, again, I know a couple of my guests have been athletes, and they've gotten injured or they've had to stop for whatever reason. That was their identity. So they lost their identity, and they decided and that started their struggle. Or it's been like so long in this struggle, that's their identity of, well, I'm the one with the eating disorder, or I'm the one that drinks a lot, or I'm the one that's super loud with this and all that. So you talked about that, but was there a point that, because you said you were searching for that identity, like, was there a point that was kind of like, not necessarily the switch flipped, or you chose to like look at, okay, this is what I'm going to become then, or, you know what I'm saying? It's like, how did things start to change then 20 years later then?
Well, it's interesting because I think at the time I thought the eating disorder was my problem. I thought that was the reason I was so unhappy. And if I could just get rid of the eating disorder, then life would be wonderful. And so because of my state of health, physically, mentally, emotionally at that time, I reached out for help and did a outpatient treatment group at that time. But then what I found is that eating disorder recovery, or the absence of symptoms, didn't make me happy. So I'm stuck with this confusion again at the end of treatment and thinking, I thought recovery was supposed to make me happy, and I'm still left with this horrible, deep unhappiness. Now, I do have clinically diagnosed major depressive disorder, but I don't, before treatment, I don't think I had even recognized that part of me. So when I started to take away the behaviors of the eating disorder, I'm left with all these deep, huge emotions that I have no idea what to do with. And they are deep and they are dark, and I don't know how to communicate about them or anything. And so going through all that depression and surfing those moods was sort of part of the journey, because I'm thinking, well, if I'm not happy, what's going to make me happy? And then I went through points where maybe nothing's going to make me happy. Maybe unhappiness is who I am. And, you go through all these lines of questioning. But then I think it was even probably 4 years ago or a little bit more. It wasn't too long after I had originally started treatment, maybe a couple years in, where I thought, okay, there's more going on here. And then so it was sort of like and this is what I call recovery now, a recovery discovery journey, if you will, because it's more about me discovering truly the things that I like and like authentically choosing because I want to and not because I think somebody else wants me to. And I found a lot of that in my head, all these ideas about why am I making this choice? And a lot of them, it comes back to because that's what I've been told I need to do. And so I'm just unraveling from that even now. But I never got to a point where, oh, it was career or I needed to do this or I needed to do this to find myself. I sort of have found myself apart from any of those things. So there isn't one thing that defines me, but there's a sense, which is remarkable to me because the depression is horrible, but there's this sense of me that is separate from it all. And so it's kind of a nice little place, even when everything else is chaotic, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does. And I think what I want, I've heard a few times before, and I really like what you said in that within that is this fact that this is any type of recovery is a journey. Mm-hmm. So it's not just, unfortunately, we can't just flip that switch and it's like over. It's like, okay, we're going to work with this now. Or my niece who's in recovery, she says, I'm going to do the next best thing. Right. Mm-hmm. And if it might be today, might be this hour, might be this week, and perhaps then work on that. And then, like you said, discover, maybe there's something else you discover within that. And it's kind of exciting because it sounds like from what you're saying, you're discovering more of who you are, and yet who you can become. It's not like this who I am, finite, that's it. But who's in there, and then like exciting, like what do I want my life to look like? Yeah. What do I want to do? Maybe discover this, maybe do this, and being intentional. I wrote that down, like intentional with your choices.
Yeah, intentional with choices is certainly a big one. Yeah, there's no finite end to it. And I think that's been one of the most liberating things about the journey that I've come across is that there isn't an end to it. And that's what I had in my head all the time. Recovery just meant an end of the bad stuff, and then everything good could begin. And life is just a mix of it all. And so being open to the experiences of what comes your way and saying, oh, this is where I'm at. And then making those intentional choices. Do I want to choose that or don't I? And recognizing that I actually can make a choice, some harder than others, because again, those ideas and beliefs go really, really deep about why you should choose one thing or the other. But even being in a position to see that, yeah, the choice is actually mine and I can make it. And if I decide once I've made it, I want to make another choice, I can do that too. Like there is no finality to it. And thank God there isn't.
Right. And I've seen some frustrations too, just on my own as I've watched the treatments and gotten to know different treatment centers and modalities and whatnot. It's almost like, again, you have this, like if they're in treatment, you have to do what everybody says, right? And so your choices are not yours. You have to follow that. And then you're out of treatment. It's almost like there's this, oh yeah, now do it all on your own but follow what they said, but now everything's better. And like, it's just, I don't think there's enough discussion of this. Like, okay, you're going to be out here, but that doesn't mean it's over. Like it still means I don't know, I could go on and on about kind of the discharge planning, if you will, and in that transition time, and just educating, the patient, if you will, about what's going to happen as they go home, but also like educating the family. And like, what does that look like? I've had so much frustration with daughter comes home and it's like, okay. And so we're kind of looking at her like, okay, so is it all good? And and it's not. I mean, we all need to be educated on this transition time. And again, the reality of what it's going to look like and how we can support ourselves, how we can support our child, that child, if you will, that patient that comes out, how can they support themselves? And to be realistic about all of it.
Yeah, I know. I think there is, and I know I certainly misunderstood what treatment meant. I thought it would be a fix, like something like a broken bone. You go in, you get a cast, and then it's not all good, but give it a little bit of time and it'll be good. But it's just so much longer and more complex than that. And I don't know if I can mention it now about my podcast.
Sure. Yeah.
That was one of the reasons why I wanted to start my podcast, is because I felt so blindsided a little bit by treatment, and that I was hearing these stories of recovery that made it sound like people would go into treatment, they'd be fixed or cured and then be fine. And I'm thinking, why am I struggling so bloody much? Like, I was struggling. It was horrible. And I felt like I was the problem. I was doing something wrong. And that's why I think it's so important to share these stories, is no, it's not just that way. There's so much more. Like, listen to these stories and you can learn so much from the different experiences. It's not just an open and close case of things.
Yeah. So you started the podcast so that you could share those stories from yourself or from others, or?
I wanted to be able to share I wanted everybody to be able to have a voice and not just like one representation of recovery. I think that's the important thing, because certainly there are people who haven't struggled as much and others have. And like, every experience, whatever it is, I feel is incredibly valid, but everybody's journey is different. Like, why we're going through these things is for different reasons. Like, what is it I have to figure out for me? What does that person have to figure out for them? Everybody has a different reason for what it is they're going through. And so I just wanted a place to be showcasing experience rather than just one particular way, where I think we can sort of get one track vision or tunnel vision of these things, that it just looks this way and that it's nice and clean and then be done with it. And it's just not.
Well, and I have said myself in the past that I almost kind of feel like, oh, well, maybe I didn't have an eating disorder. Maybe it was just because it wasn't really that bad. Right. But when I think back on it, yes, it was, I was in a bad place emotionally, my self-concept, my self-esteem. There was struggles there, and that was what I chose to restrict. And so it doesn't matter if it, for me, perhaps lasted 2 years or 10 years, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if somebody like yours lasted 20 years. So that doesn't give yours like, oh, well, that's the eating disorder. I don't really have it. Like, that's what I love about what you do, is that, we want to give light to all of it, because someone may hear something from your story that's so valuable that they've never heard before. That said, oh, that gives them permission to be okay with exactly where they're at, and then show them that, okay, you can take a path forward, and it may look different than that person that's next to you, and that's okay, right?
And it probably will look different in many ways. Yeah, for sure. I was just, you were on my podcast a few weeks ago, and
Mhm.
your episode is actually airing this Monday. And so I was doing some editing today, and you mentioned that again. I was listening to that where you said that, you know, the further you got away from it, you would be thinking, oh, it wasn't that bad. And I think that's such a dangerous mindset too, that's important to highlight, is that, yeah, it doesn't matter whether you've had it for a day or 100 days or 50 years. Like, there is nothing cool about an eating disorder at all. Like, there's just, I just bought the book Sick Enough. I've never read it before.
I have that book. Yep.
And I'm curious to read it because I think, yeah, there's a lot of misinformation. And even I'm hearing people still, their doctors are telling them, well, if your BMI were just this much lower, then we could send you to treatment. And like, there's these hard classifications. And it's just, you know, I get the systems, it's financially driven and politically driven, much of healthcare. But the eating disorders aren't, and in approaching it that way, you miss the human experience of it. It's just, you're sick enough. If you think you have an issue, you probably have you probably do.
Right. And it is frustrating. Again, my daughters, we've been in this journey for 6 years, and this last year has been very frustrating because I've seen that. And it probably is because of this pandemic and the struggles that people are going through is just, that much more. There are so many struggles. Someone I can't remember who it was, but I saw something on a support group's page that an actress just recently, died.
Nikki Graham?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And it was because of her isolation and not being able to go to the gym and whatnot, during this COVID time. So there's so much more struggle. And so we found that as we were trying to find another place for my daughter, those restrictions, if you will, or those things that you had to check off all of those boxes, there were so many more. And, going to a place where my daughter definitely needed the support because of some other mess up and she didn't have her medication, they weren't shipped. It was just like, okay, she's going through like detox as well as being it's just, we need some help. Mm-hmm. And after we went through the evaluation at this place, they said, well, you know what? We probably have to have some lab work done and probably have to have some. I'm like, what? Like she is clearly, but they said, well, when we don't really have space for it anyway, even if we could, so let's get the lab work done. I was like, that was just another qualifier or whatever. And I'm sorry, I'm just doing a little bit of bitching here, but, then called her psychiatrist. It happened to be on a weekend. And again, she had come home from a treatment place. They said they were overnighting the meds because they didn't want to send her home with them. And they never arrived when they were supposed to because they put the incorrect address. Mm-hmm. So she doesn't have her meds. So I called the psychiatrist's office on the weekend, Saturday night, probably 10 o'clock. I said, could you please call him and let him know this situation? Like she is kind of going through like a detox. She hasn't had them for like 3, and she's really struggling. Mm-hmm. She said, yeah, we don't make phone calls to the doctors for a refill request on the weekends. Mm-hmm. Like, hello, yeah. This isn't like a typical, come on. I said, let me tell you again. And she wouldn't break the rules. Mm-hmm. I said, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I know it wasn't a podcast about but I think these are the realities of what we're dealing with. And if a parent's listening to this, perhaps they can understand it. It's like this frustration with, like you said, okay, my daughter's not sick enough. Like, and even my daughter said that to me. She goes, 5 years ago when I was coming here, they admitted me just like that. And I wasn't even half as sick as I am now. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, it's scary, very, very scary that you have to almost be in a critical place in order to get help. And that's unfortunate because, for me, I think like I was high functioning for 20 years, but like it took a toll, like it takes a toll. And I think the sooner you can address things like that. And like, I don't know why there's limits on how sick you need to be. It's just really, oh, I know it's so difficult.
It's very frustrating.
Yes.
But I want to give some light before we, wrap things up with this too. Because you talk about yoga
Mm-hmm.
and mindfulness, and I love
Mm-hmm.
to talk about yoga, and I love yoga. I know it has provided so much healing for me in my life. And I found that with many, as they've recovered, they found a place in yoga and that peace that brings you. So let's talk about that. Like, how'd you find yoga, and how has that really helped you along your life journey?
I've had a love-hate relationship with yoga, so it hasn't all been pleasant. I originally started yoga just dabbling on my own, and over years my interest grows, and I was really looking for a practice that I could do at home on my own because I'm not the most social person. I didn't want to have to go out to the gym. I just wanted something that I could do in the comfort of my own home that was focused and intentional for me. And I came across Ashtanga yoga, which is, if you've heard of it or know of it, it's quite vigorous and
It is. I've
stressful.
done it a couple of times at one of the
Yeah.
studios here. Yeah.
And so, and I'm not, and I don't say anything bad about Ashtanga yoga, but I went into it with the mind of someone with an eating disorder who is very black and white, who takes things to extremes. And so I used yoga in that way and caused more damage. And there was just something underneath that, though, that was giving me more inner awareness through the practice that I knew was important. But over time, I realized, Ashtanga is not something I can physically and mentally do. Like it's almost like torturing myself doing it. And so I had to explore different kinds of yoga, different purposes for yoga. I know people recovering from eating disorders often have a hard time with exercise, and I did too. Why am I doing this activity? And for so long it was because you got to try and keep your weight at a certain level, and you do that through physical activity. Like that's all physical activity has ever been. And so I had to find this new relationship with movement and why am I doing it? And I started exploring different avenues of yoga, and two that I have come across and that I continue to practice and implement various principles, if you will, into my own practice is something called adaptive yoga. There's a organization in Minnesota called Mind Body Solutions, and they focus on using yoga to heal and transcend trauma and disability. But they present, and I went for training a few weeks in Minnesota over a period of time, and they helped me to see yoga in a different way as a way to experiencing myself. Like the purpose in adaptive yoga is to experience 4 basic sensations. And this is like really narrowing it down, but grounding, expansion, rhythm, and balance. And when I could focus on that, it helped me get on my mat and think, okay, this is all I'm doing. I'm just looking for these particular sensations. And not knowing what they were took me out of my head trying to give them fancy names and experiences and put me back into my body and sort of having those visceral experiences that I had been so cut off from for so long. And so I started to sort of feel the connection grow, if you will, between that
Right.
mind body, like starting to feel myself again in ways. And then another style of yoga, there's a woman, oh, I don't know where she is now. She was in North Carolina. Subtle yoga is what she practices and teaches. I think her name is Christine Weber. Her name is Christine Weber. And I've done a lot of training through her online programs because she focuses on yoga and the connection to the brain and the changes, the neuroplastic changes that can be made through yoga. And so her focus on yoga is really she looks at yoga as inner size instead of exercise. So as a way to develop inner awareness and build greater resilience for the nervous system. And those are the things that I have found incredibly beneficial for me, is hitting sort of the nervous system side of things, if you will.
That's not, yeah, I haven't heard of either one of those. So that's fascinating. I'm going to look into it. I like, well, and I've heard it be said that, again, when you're in your struggles, I mean, kind of you're not connected, right? You're kind of in this other place. And so that's why sometimes yoga can be so helpful, is that grounding part of it. And yeah, I just love everything you said about that.
Yeah.
I love that, just, I think sometimes when we're given something, so I was talking with someone the other day, we were talking about meditation versus, she has that like heart math. Do you know about heart math?
Yes.
Yeah. So we were talking about that. I was asking her about it. She's been a heart math practitioner and she uses it. And I was talking to her because I might start to use that. I feel like, I don't know, I keep hearing about it. I've interviewed a couple of people on the podcast and they brought it up, and that's always my cue to, well, maybe if you hear this things more than 2 or 3 times, maybe you should look into it. And so we talked about that, like with meditation, difference between that and like the heart math. And just meditation, you kind of just zen out and you're just not kind of connected. But with what you're saying with yoga, and I think with this heart math too, you're much more, I don't know, I'm probably not explaining it best with the heart math. I've contacted somebody to try to interview them for the podcast so I can learn more about it. But just having that connection to your body and that groundedness, it can be a scary place to try to get there, but it's so important.
Yeah, it's certainly, I wouldn't say it was like the best experience for me, because I don't have a history of any traumatic experience or trauma. Yeah, I lived through volatility as a child because of my parents, but I don't have PTSD or something like that. And yet coming back into feeling my body was and has not been comfortable for me. Like really, really uncomfortable, because I also deal with chronic pain. So it's not a pleasant place to be all the time in my body. And so feeling it, and certainly in recovery, feeling it, like I didn't realize until I started to feel it again, how little I had actually felt my body in 20 years. Like I literally was holding my breath for 20 years and barely moving, even though I was moving, but I was not in touch with it at all. So when I started to, it was actually pretty uncomfortable. And so I'm much more, much more comfortable with it now, but certainly there's room to grow and discover. But yeah, it can be scary.
Well, it's scary. And it is that, that's what I've noticed as I've started to ballroom dance. And I've realized that that's a form of healing for me, not just enjoyment, but it's become a form of healing. And I realized that I went through a mindfulness-based stress reduction course. And just that I felt like I discovered that I had been kind of going through the motions in so many things and being a bit numb because of the things around me. And as I started to dance, and I still remember, and it gives me like little chills on my fingers. I remember there was one lesson and we were doing the foxtrot, and, as I separated and then came back and took his hand, like I could feel it. And I don't know, I just went someplace else, and he's like, don't look down. And I'm like, no, I'm good. But it struck me in that moment, like, wow, I can actually feel that connection. And for so long, I didn't even realize that I had been so numbed out. And so it's a beautiful awakening when those type of things happen. And it does take you, at least with me, it took me by surprise. I'm like, whoa, what was that?
Yeah. It's those little moments, and they aren't that grand all the time, but those little moments that there's something more to explore. It's very sort of exciting. And as you're telling me that, I'm getting goosebumps because I can feel it.
Yeah. Well, and even that breath, because that's what another one of they both say. I dance with a couple of gentlemen. They're like, you can breathe now. Like, I don't realize I hold my breath so much. And that's a practice for me too, is to try to, he's like, I don't know if you should chew gum during practice. Like he said, I'm trying to figure out how I can get you to make sure you breathe,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm fine. Again, I don't even think about it, but obviously it's something that's been a pattern that I've had. And yet, as we breathe, right, there's just more freedom
Mm-hmm.
and movement and,
Mm-hmm.
relaxation and grounding and things like that. So um, it's very interesting, but really, again, cool and exciting. And we can find in yoga, we can find in dance, when you find these modalities, if you will, that are really healing.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
can be really healing for us. And it sounds like that's.
Yeah, yoga combined with the mindfulness and learning more about my mind, because my mind goes at speeds that are dizzying. And I remember one time sitting in my psychologist's office, just like I'm bawling my eyes out and holding my head because I just can't stop it. And so just doing yoga without a gentle intention to focus my mind on something can just leave me feeling more chaotic. And so I really have to not only move the body gently, but engage my mind gently so that they come together. It's both practices I think are really important, and as well including the breath there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you've shared, I have a question here that I was going to ask you about the things that have helped. And you've really shared a lot of that with mindfulness and the yoga, um, and things that we've talked about. Were there other things like books or, things you watched or other types of therapies or, things that you were involved in that really either helped or continue to help you stay on this path of discovery and improvement, if you will?
Mm-hmm. There's been a lot, and I wouldn't say I've stuck with one particular thing over all this time. Right now, it's mindfulness and yoga, but one I started exploring the world of energy, if you will, like Reiki and things like that. And one of the energy healing practices that I became interested in is something called Huna, Huna. And while I don't have a huge connection energetically to feeling energy, I do in my heart. And the Huna principles are ones that really sort of resonated with me. And especially one of the principles, and I've used this one before, effectiveness is the measure of truth. And so part of my recovery, I really struggled with the fear of getting it wrong. Part of it is a religious upbringing, that I have these very black and white, good and bad, right and wrong ways of looking at things. But I always felt that for some reason, I was doing it wrong. I was always wrong. And I eventually got to a point where I said, okay, I'm done being wrong. I can't be wrong all the time. There has to be times where I'm okay too. If I'm living in a world with billions of other people, why am I the only one that's wrong? And so I sort of disowned that part of me, saying, no, I'm not wrong. It's just, this isn't effective for me. And that principle sort of gave me permission to explore things in a different way, not right or wrong, but is it effective for me? And that was a big one.
Yeah, I haven't heard of Huna before myself, although, again, I've become really quite aware of Reiki and energy work too. So uh,
Mm-hmm.
thanks for sharing that. How would you say, again, this wasn't on the list, but I
Mm-hmm.
mean, how would you say that your relationships have changed with others? Or I haven't talked about your parents. I mean, often I'll ask about mother-daughter relationships, but I certainly know that relationships can be impacted when there's someone in struggle, and
Mm-hmm.
then in recovery it can be different. Do you feel like there's, been some change in that as you've been able to come farther along in your healing?
Yep, definitely. I have a yeah, eating disorders, just mine, kept me so into myself and unwilling to share, and always felt like uh, I was out of control, like I had no control over anything. And my relationship with life has just changed in general. And I'm not saying that specifically because of the eating disorder recovery. I think that's more been on the happiness peace journey for me, in that I'm finding different ways to relate to the world so I don't feel so contained in this tiny little box. Like, I'm opening the box and being okay with getting brushed and rubbed the wrong way and tolerating those difficulties. And then also relying on other people, which for a long time I have not been able to do. Don't want to ask anybody for help, want to do it on my own. People aren't dependable, all those sorts of things. And so really sort of understanding that the world, the people in my life actually want to help me. And but I have to know how to ask them to help me. And so that's been challenging for me to figure out in these moments, like where I get frustrated, think, okay, he or she, they're not the problem. They want to help me. How can I help them know what to do? Because they'll do it. I just have to tell them, and that's the struggle for me, trying to figure out what it is I need someone else to do and then ask for it. But yeah, certainly relationships have changed and grown and blossomed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think sometimes within that help or support is that feeling like you're worthy enough for someone to help you. You know, speaking from experience myself. So your podcast, let's tell the listeners what your podcast is called and where they can find that.
It's called Starving Ed for Eating Disorders. And it grew out of years ago when I first started treatment. I had started a blog and I had called it Starving Ed, with, the one that native story about the two wolves and whichever one you feed wins. And so I called the podcast that, and I wanted the podcast to be a platform where I could share stories, because hearing other people's stories can be so beneficial, but also as a guest being able to share your own story. And because feeling heard was a big part of my recovery, it's like a platform where people can feel heard. Like every story is valid. Every story is valid. And so it's on most major podcast player platforms. It's relatively new. There's an episode every other Monday with a guest, and then I do a shorter episode each Thursday, just sharing some of my own experiences and addressing some questions that listeners have sent in.
Yeah, I like those too. I've listened to a few of those. Just kind of your musings or your thoughts on Thursdays. Yeah,
it's good. I have a sort of. I'm tentative about my approach, because when I give answers to people who have asked questions or things, I always want to make it clear that it's just my experience. It's not an answer to the world's problems. It's just, this is one way that I looked at it that could help somebody else. Take it or leave it. Again, effectiveness is the measure of truth.
Right. But I think that, again, I want you to hear that, like my editor, when he because I do have an editor, Andrew. Say hi to Andrew, who's listening to this. He will when he edits Andrew. It. But he has told me, as he's listened to all my episodes, he said, I'm quite fond when you turn the microphone on yourself. And he said, it's just this rawness that I have, he said, that is so relatable. He said that's so good. And he encourages me to do more of that. So I'll encourage you to do more of that, because again, it's not this finite truth of what we share. But I must say, if you haven't listened to, I had an episode where I had gone into a treatment center locally here to drop some things off for my daughter, said hello to the receptionist, put them in the proper place, turned around and went to walk out. And I saw a mom sitting in the chairs with a son next to her. The son had the clipboard filling things out. And I looked at her, and the fear in her eyes was palpable. And I had been there before. And so I went out to my car and I turned on my phone and I recorded an episode and I said, I see you. And so, again, not that I have all the answers, but I could relate to her because I'd been there before. And that's, I believe, what the purpose of doing this is, to just relate our stories and our experiences. And if it's me talking with you so you can share, or you going solo, me going solo. I've done it when I've been walking. I've done it in the parking lot of O'Hare Airport when I've dropped my daughter off one more time to go to one more treatment. There are so many people that need to hear our stories. And I just encourage you, because I know you do a great job, but just to continue to stay outside of that place of, oh, it's not right, it's not perfect, and maybe this isn't the right thing. It's like, who? There's billions of people right in the world. And so somebody's going to relate to what we're going through. And so we continue to share. Yeah, we continue to share. I got a phone call and a text a couple weeks ago. And this gentleman said, I just need you to hear this. And he told me the impact that because of because of this, and then as this, and then this person listened, and now this is happening, and you are having an impact. So I think we need to hear those. I know we need to hear those stories and share the stories with others, because someone should be hearing it,
Yeah, that's what I feel. And thank you for the reminder, because that's still one of the voices in my head that I fight every single day. Nobody wants to hear what I have to say. And I think, nope, not gonna stop there. Everybody's voice deserves to be heard, including my own. And so, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Everybody's voice matters. And there's truth there. So if people don't find you at the Starving Ed podcast, where can they find you, Kristen?
I have a website, mypieceofyoga.com, and pieces spelled Piece. And I'm also on Instagram at the same handle at mypieceofyoga.
Good. Yeah. Any last words just to, as we wrap this up? I'm so thankful that we've had this time to have a conversation.
It's been wonderful speaking with you. I love having the conversations and the people I'm meeting across the world. It's just been wonderful. Thank you for the work that you do. And if anybody would like to contact me who's listening and has questions, I'm available through email, Kristen@mypieceofyoga.com.
Good. Yeah. Thank you, Kristen. Great, wonderful tidbits. And again, thank you for sharing your story. And again, the work that you're doing and those yoga things. I always want to learn. And I always say that part of the reason why I do this podcast is for me to learn too, because again, there's all kinds of, and that's just, I'm a perpetual learner. So I made some notes and I'm going to look into that. And I just love those. So thanks for sharing. Again, thanks listeners for coming back to listen, and please continue to share, because again, that's where I keep hearing that's like, well, I shared your podcast with somebody and they're now doing this, or they thanked me for this, or whatever the case is. So continue to share. If you like our podcasts, be it Kristen's or mine, please rate, review, share, give us 5 stars, all those kind of things, because that's how we continue to get our stories out. So thanks again for listening. Thanks again, Kristen, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening. If you like this podcast, head over to iTunes and leave me a 5-star review. Share it with others, and make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. I've got a tribe over on Facebook, so head over there and search for Juggling the Chaos of Recovery Podcast Tribe. And do you know somebody who has a story to share, a story of recovery and hope? Please let me know, as I'd love to feature them as a guest on one of these next upcoming podcasts. And perhaps you're looking for a community of like-minded, collaborative, and supportive people who cheer each other on as we strive to improve our lives. If that sounds like something you've been looking for, schedule some time with me. You'll find the links in the show notes. Let's talk, and let me help you find your way. And I'm here to tell you that you're worth it.